A function is just a rule that assigns one output for each allowable input. While the inputs and outputs don't have to be numbers in math, we mostly deal with functions where these are numbers. The domain is the set of all allowable inputs. It's what we are allowed to put into this rule. And the range is all allowable outputs, what we actually get out of the function. A lot of times you see functions defined as function machines. We put something into the machine, apply the rule, and get an output. The only real rule for a function is if it's allowed to go into the rule, we can only get one thing out. So I can't put one thing in and get multiple outputs. Anything that goes in has to go to exactly one output. In this video, I mainly want to talk about describing functions with words. When we try to describe a function with words, there are two things we need. The first thing we need to know is what are the allowable inputs? What is it that we can put into our function? The second thing, what is the rule that states how to get the output? So we need to know what we're allowed to input and then what is the rule. Let's define a function that inputs a person and then finds the height of that person in centimeters. If we go back to our function machine, our inputs would be people, so I could input a person into my machine, and I output a number that corresponds to their height, given in centimeters. And this would be a function because for every person, we get exactly one height. Every person has exactly one height at a given time. So this would be a function. As another example, I want to define a function that inputs a year and then determines the number of blue whales alive at the end of the year. This time on my function machine, I input a year, such as 2019. And then we will output a number, which is the number of blue whales alive at the end of the year. So this would be a function since for every year that I input, there's going to be one number that describes the number of blue whales alive at the end of the year. I wouldn't be able to input a year and get two possible numbers. Let's do one last example. This time we have a rocket that's launched, goes up to a height of 500 meters above the ground, and then falls back down. I want to define a rule that inputs numbers between 0 and 500. We're going to denote that by h. Our rule then determines the number of seconds after the rocket was fired when the rocket is h meters above the ground. And this one is actually not a function. Let's say we input 400. Well, then we have two possible outputs. So our rocket is going to go up, and eventually it hits a height of 400, especially since the actual maximum height is 500. Once it hits 500 meters above the ground, we said that it then falls back down. So it then comes back down from 500 back down to 0. So we have to cross that 400 point again. So now I have two times that correspond to a height of 400. So that would be two possible outputs. So this is an example of something that is not a function.